Lookism chapter 569. PTJ with the back-to-back bangers. Honestly, didn't even know he had that in his bag still, but apparently he does. You never really know with PTJ, do you? This chapter was nothing short of an absolute banger. Pacing wasn't as terrible as last chapter according to the people on Reddit, I guess. And yes, I did go back on there despite saying I wouldn't. Anyway, that's enough yapping. So the chapter picks up exactly where the last one left off, and apparently last chapter had a couple parts that I didn't exactly see or go over. That being the last part with Jaegyeon and Big Deal, but apparently this chapter kicks off with that, so we get to go over it anyway. Jaegyeon makes a comment on the current state of the situation, saying it's gotten a lot better and now they actually have room to start their operation. They're going to charge for a united Inchon. Speaking of a united Inchon, UJ makes his appearance this chapter and completely interrupts Jaegyeon's moment, saying the Dark Society are gonna be the ones winning this time and not Speed. And while this is happening, we see a man lunging at Jake Kim and getting axe kicked to fucking oblivion by Daniel. And when Daniel is approached the same way after thanking Jake, Jaegyeon speeds in to save his ass and says he should be the one thanking him for helping Speed out. And Jake Kim has his own little moment here, saying the reason he's helping Speed is not because he likes them. The reason he's helping Speed is because of that wish to protect. He knows that feeling and that's why he's joining sides with Speed. And as this is happening, Lineman does exactly what he does best, bursting through a couple poor guys with a lightning trail behind him, which, by the way, if PTJ is trying to tell us that Lineman is actually moving the speed of lightning, then that would put his speed at a solid 270,000 miles per hour if it's just the discharge. Or if it's just the light that he's moving as fast as here, then he's literally moving at light speed. 670 million miles per hour or something like that. I haven't taken physics in a while, so I don't exactly remember what C equates to. It's more than likely just a cool effect though, because if he was moving at either of those speeds, it'd be enough to eliminate the entire human race. So Lineman then gets snuck up on the same way Jake and Daniel did, and this time he gets his ass saved by Samuel. He tells him not to embarrass himself when he's a part of Big Deal, and that he never taught him to lose to guys like this. And Speed is starting to get surrounded at this rate, and it's at this moment that Jaegyeon and Daniel begin to panic, because their textbook plan to escape is starting to look a little far-fetched due to the sheer numbers of the Dark Crocodile Society's forces. And this is where someone like Samuel comes in handy, because he quite literally just says, "What's so difficult? Just barge through them." And when asked if he has a way out, he says, "It's nothing hard, though it isn't exactly my kind of thing." He then lights his cigarette, flicks it into the air, lighting every one of Chinatown's lanterns on fire, at least the ones in the vicinity, and as the lanterns begin to drop and burn the area, the Dark Society's forces simply just flee. This is when the Inchon Taxi Union comes in and urges Speed and Big Deal to come with them so they can escape. The citizens also begin their escape so they don't get in the guy's way, and when they finally do leave the area, Dark Society's number 2 orders their forces to chase after them. However, UJ points out that the taxis were merely just a distraction, and he says they're probably in that never-ending hole. And since they're inside the labyrinth, the Dark Society have already lost them. Now, I'm not exactly sure how fast these people have to be in order for them to be able to literally vanish without being seen even by someone like UJ Sion, and I'm not sure why UJ didn't decide to chase them either, but I guess the only answer to that question would be plot. We then get the intermission card and the actual chapter starts, which, by the way, this somehow marks the 12th episode of Inchon. I don't know how we're already 12 weeks in, that's pretty much 3 months, but time flies, man. After the intermission, we cut to the hideout where Speed and Big Deal are staying, and this is where Jake actually asks the million-dollar question of whether or not these are all of Speed's members, and the answer to that is obviously yes. And upon hearing that, Jake immediately decides they're fucked, though Daniel reassures Jake in saying Speed's members are a lot stronger than they look, and Jaegyeon decides to explain the plan, and whilst he explains the plan, we pan to Yoel's shoes, which appear to have a GPS tracker on them. Not exactly the sight we wanted or needed to see, because at first sight, without knowing what happens at the latter part of this chapter, you'd think PTJ just made this arc 100 times longer, and he almost did. We cut to UJ and the Dark Society, who seem to have followed Speed and Inchon's underground and actually made it directly to their hideout through the GPS tracker, and it is revealed to us here that this whole time it was UJ who planted the GPS onto Yoel, which isn't really that big of a surprise because none of the guys seem nearly as clever as UJ, though you might be able to make an exception for Hwarang. More than half of the Dark Society is waiting at Speed's door, and once UJ opens said door expecting to see Jaegyeon with a perplexed look on his face, there's nobody home, except for the GPS tracker they left and a note calling UJ a dumb fuck on the floor. Not exactly UJ's brightest moment, and we cut back to Jaegyeon to get some clarification on what exactly went down. Jaegyeon first asks Daniel and Big Deal why they think Speed has been able to attack Chinatown this whole entire time, and answers himself by saying it's because of their sheer numbers. Again, this is something I mentioned and went over in the latest chapter review last week, so if you haven't seen that, you can go check it out if you'd like. But the point is, Dark Society's power comes from their numbers, and I think this is pretty evident by now. They've just got way too many members, hence Jaegyeon focused mainly on studying how to draw their forces away rather than extinguish them. This is because the main targets are UJ Sion and Peichon Jo, and they need the Dark Society's main forces out of the way in order to actually be able to take them down. They need to get to them first. And how do they do that? Their hideout. Jaegyeon's gonna leak their hideout to the Dark Society. This is because Jaegyeon and UJ have been at war for a while, and just like UJ thinks he can read Jaegyeon like a book, Jaegyeon can can actually read UJ like a book as he's done many times in the past, being able to catch him off guard in many encounters just due to sheer intellect and intuition. What differs UJ from Jae-gyeon is not his intuition, because Jae-gyeon definitely takes that. It is UJ's ability to be able to already deal with shitty situations. Not that he's been put in many for the audience to see though. This is definitely one of those shitty situations though, as Jae-gyeon mentions that UJ has wanted to uproot Speed completely for quite a while now, but he was always at a disadvantage because he didn't know the exact location of their hideout. This time it'll be different because he planted the GPS on Yoel, which Jae-gyeon knew before even checking apparently, because he had just memorized his rival's patterns. And Jae-gyeon here says that UJ probably planted the GPS when he had Yoel caught there, because he has always had a habit of planting GPS ever since his time as the motorcycle hunter. It seems I was wrong though. Jae-gyeon knew the entire time. He just kept it on Yoel in order to make sure UJ not only thinks he doesn't know, but actually ends up showing to the hideout. And you know UJ wouldn't be dumb enough to show up without any forces, so he shows up with half of the entire Dark Society, possibly the worst mistake he could have made yet. And Jae-gyeon quite literally predicts this too, by the way. He knew exactly how many people UJ would bring, that being half of the Dark Society's forces, which he did. The only problem is though, Speed weren't at the hideout any longer. Speed was now too busy robbing the Dark Society's empty house. A call from Chinatown comes in and shit is just as bad as expected. Not only is Speed infiltrating, but there's also not many Dark Society forces there right now, which is not the ideal situation for UJ Sion. Whilst Daniel and Jake are discussing the current situation, Jake points out that Speed's headcount is too little right now, too small to take over the entire place, and that's when Jae-gyeon mentions that they actually have someone who's gonna help. We were all expecting Gu to show up here, let's not lie to ourselves, except for the select few who were expecting Seong-ji for some reason. But instead we got an outcome that, me personally, I wouldn't say I'm even disappointed about. All the kings whom Inchon won over have arrived, starting with BJ Shobu, the femboy king of Bucheon. First of all, I didn't even know there was a city in South Korea that went by the name of Bucheon, but apparently now I know there is. And also I can't tell whether this human being is of the male or female gender, possibly both. Regardless, we then get the second first generation king arriving to the aid of Speed, that being Ju Hyuk, the king of Wee Jongbu. Not even gonna try to pronounce that name properly. It's hard to believe some of these people are actually first generation kings due to how young they look, but they seemingly actually are. And I'd also like to point out that I definitely didn't expect PTJ to take the first generation this far and actually flesh it out this much and give us this many first generation kings, especially in surges of 3 to 5 at once like this, but it seems like this is a habitual occurrence now. The next first generation king is one which they messed up the layering on, so they literally just showed the black part of his eye for the entire thing. That being Jaemin. No, not gonna lie, at first this guy kinda scared me because I thought he might have had UI, but it's just PTJ's art team messing up the layering. And I did talk to my friend about this and he said it was helpful because he now knows what kind of brushes they use, which is a pretty funny outtake. And now this is the final part of the chapter, and as Jae-gyeon is addressing his targets as Yoo Jae-seon and Paechon-jo, we actually cut to Paechon and what seems to be his temple or whatever the fuck kind of building he's staying in, and he's staring at some sort of sword. Yeah, what he's holding in his hands is the fucking Hwarang sword in all of its goddamn glory, just right fucking there. PTJ just decides, you know what, I'm just gonna fucking reveal this thing out of nowhere, and well, there you have it folks. A weapon of mass destruction, potentially the most overpowered thing in all of Lookism, has now been revealed, and it's only a matter of time before I start pushing this Go agenda. I'm gonna leave that for a future video though. I'm out.